Hey everybody, it's a Wednesday where I'm going to talk about games. By request, I'm going to talk about Disco Elysium today. And again, these videos are a combination of my personal thoughts about the game and then some sort of design deep dive, not criticism. This is my way of enjoying games. So anything I say that's, not glowing about the game, just give it a chance, okay? Because Disco Elysium is a game I overall very much enjoyed. It's kind of nihilistic for my taste, but the thing I liked about it is if you played through it multiple times, you could get a lot of different options. It in terms of dialogue and in terms of branching narratives to an extent. I didn't find, like entire new paths opened up or anything like that, but it didn't have to, right? The joy of the game, if you will, is it's a simple story of this one not very good detective solving a case, and you learn some things about his history. He's an amnesiac, of course. And it's a shitty world full of shitty people, and it's an experiment in how do you want to fail? And I mean you can solve the case, but the guy's life doesn't become suddenly better. The world's not saved. It's a story of one guy and sort of a voyage of discovery. Now, this may sound like something of a downer. It can be. It is an Eastern European game. And this is where I think Disco Elysium exists on the head of a pin, and how the critical response to this game didn't do it any favors. Now, if you like this sort of commentary, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. The workshop on not beating yourself up is happening this Friday. If you'd like to buy tickets for somebody just donated, just buy the ticket and then the buy two get one free option, and then put donated ticket in the name of your guest if you want to just donate a ticket for someone else. $10 is not a lot to ask. There are a few people who are, I know, I verified, are on some sort of disability pension or social assistance. And in those cases, $10 every month, when they're getting, paid below the poverty line, that is not necessarily doable. So yeah, that's what I figured out how to do, the donated ticket thing. And it just helps us out. I really hope people come, even if you think you don't need it. It's going to be fun. I think the presentation's funny, and I thought Disco Elysium, not only was it suggested by somebody in comments last week, they want me to talk about it, but it's here. And yes, Slimer is still back. I remembered I removed Slimer because I was doing some corporate stuff and I was afraid it would scare the straights. And then somebody said, "Where's Slimer?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, shit, Slimer's over there." But getting back to Disco Elysium, the thing that makes Disco Elysium work is how they bring beauty to a shithole. And for people who don't know the game, I'm going to show you a screen grab. It doesn't look quite this good on most machines. I'm not sure what this was taken on. It doesn't say, just that it was provided. But this is the basic idea of the game. Planescape Torment was a heavy influence on it. And so you see it's isometric, and it's, a world where there is garbage everywhere. But the painted look, the brush strokes make it not realistic. I mean, you don't feel like you can see how bad it smells. And you notice the characters are quite grotesque. The dude's a drunk whose necktie talks to him. Yeah, you'll see. Horrific necktie. And Inland Empire is one of the stats, one of the skills you can develop that I really enjoyed. piling points in an Inland Empire. And it's one of those stats that doesn't do a lot early on, but the more you up it, the more weird shit happens. And to me, that surrealism, that magic in an ugly world, and the internal meaning for the main character. What's his name? Harry something? I never remember the guy. See, his name doesn't really matter. He's such an everyman. But yeah, let me look up the name again. I'm trying to remember. This article does not say so. Wow, so typical. Let's see if I've got a million things open for, it is Harry. Okay, I was right. Harry. So to me, the most enjoyable way to play the game is to come up with what kind of cracked Harry is. And of course, the games press treated this game like it was some sort of genius political treatise. And I actually found the exact opposite. The moaning about politics was like my least favorite part. It only worked in my playthroughs. It only worked to serve as a balance for the way Harry becomes increasingly unspooled and, starts having these flashback memories and talking to things that shouldn't be talking and having these sublime, weird experiences. The blah, 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 communism, hyper-libertarianism, even sort of the moderate path is tinged with, religious zealotry. And that was one of the things that I found you had to take it on its own merits. You had to go, okay, this is a world of extremes. That's the way they want to go about it. Do I enjoy worlds full of extremes? Not personally, because especially where, in many ways, the game feels extremely Eastern European, and the strongest kind of attitude of the Eastern European people I know is, we don't give a fuck. Old boss, same as the new boss, don't care, drink vodka. And, I mean, Harry is a drunk. He's a disaster. And I don't know if he's capable of being redeemed, so to speak. It's one of those things where you get to know him and you get to know his inner sadness and you understand why he's a disaster. And yeah, I mean, I guess I redeemed him somewhat in my playthrough, but he's never going to be like, a paragon of virtue. And he's not meant to be. And to me, the cheering that the games press did really, really missed what the game did well. Because some of the stuff I read about this game, I avoided playing it for a really long time because the write-ups on it just made it seem pretentious as fuck. And I played it, and it was this goofy, interesting alternatives to combat role-playing experience that I did feel and think got quite deep in places, as long as you were willing to accept the cliches that the game is, knee deep in. Amnesiac drunk cop. Maybe they don't do that in games a lot, but basically that's The Witcher in the games, right? I mean, Eastern European amnesiac drunk cop. I've come across that scenario so many times, and the games press just cheered because it wasn't, some champion that saves the world. Okay, great, but Dragon Age 2 wasn't a save the world scenario either. It was one city. And that's sort of the closest in terms of some of the some of the choices. Obviously, Dragon Age 2 had a much bigger budget. But in terms of how the narratives branched and in terms of how different Disco Elysium and Dragon Age 2 were on a second playthrough, um, that's the closest thing and that I can think of, other than something like, Tides of Numenera, or what's the other one that's a torment thing, isometric. Anyway, you know the ones I'm talking about. They were very much obvious fantasy realms. Disco Elysium is also a fantasy realm, but it's more like near our world fantasy or dystopian fantasy as opposed to high fantasy. And for some odd reason, games critics, this is a revelation to them, instead of it being, it's that Fallout is that, Cyberpunk is that. They keep saying this game is steampunk, but I haven't seen a ton of that. I get the steampunk. See, steampunk to me is an aesthetic, not a genre. I mean, what are the markers of a steampunk story? It's all just how something looks. And since a lot of that is borrowed from Victorian aesthetics, and whenever something deals with Eastern European communism, they always go sort of retro-futuristic because, they had tractors from the 1920s running. Hell, they're probably still using them because communism meant they didn't get that creative destruction that kept things newer. But yeah, Dragon Age 2 was, I think, the only game I deliberately went, I am going to turn this review in late. I told my editor when I finished it the first time, I said, I don't think I can honestly tell you what this game does. And I'm glad I did, because I was really disappointed in my first playthrough of Dragon Age 2. After Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2 was such a small, sort of contained experience, and I was like, that's it? But then I played it through a second time, and the branching storytelling is so robust. I was like, yeah, this is an actual RPG. Did it get rewarded for that? No, because it's a long-ass game. There wasn't a ton of time to review it. People only played it through once because that was all the time they had. Good job, EA. And so it got unfairly sort of downvoted in the early days. Now, I guess because Disco Elysium was sort of this little game that could, and there was the, made for the games press story of the dev team's, real world struggles with alcoholism. I don't know why the games press is so fascinated by that stuff. It's an interesting factoid for fans. It makes you understand some of the sentiments of why this depiction of an alcoholic cop is so self-effacing, and the guy's such a train wreck. But even then, I mean, not all people who are alcoholics are that disastrous. Some of them are, a lot of people are functional addicts, functional alcoholics, and they're the ones that end up really, really sick. Even fatty food, like even too much fast food. I was reading an article about how they're finding fatty liver in fairly young people who don't even drink because of their diets. So, I mean, that's just one of those things where it's interesting, but does that improve the quality of the game? Not directly. And like I said, all the political stuff, it's the BioShock thing, objectivism, communism, on just these big extremes so you can make political statements. The interesting thing about Disco Elysium is none of it really matters. The other thing Disco Elysium does that's cool is, much like the Yakuza games, having the main character behave like an ass is a legitimate choice. The game doesn't punish you per se for screwing up a social interaction horribly, which, I mean, that was the only correct choice based on who the character is, because the guy's so fucked up. But some of the political stuff for me did go on long. Now, I played it before they released the final cut. Apparently, they've added some things to it since then. They've added voices, and oh my god, I'd be skipping because it's like political blah blah, don't care, really don't care. I mean, understanding how the politics of the worlds work when you have to get past, like, a bunch of roughnecks on strike, or you have to navigate certain characters. It's important to understand the world and interact with it. But ultimately, does it say anything about extremist political positions? No, because it just takes the position of everything is wrong and none of it matters. And the thing Dragon Age 1 and 2 did well is they worked together. Origins was like, everybody's right in a way. And then Dragon Age 2 was everybody's wrong in a way. The Origin characters started off as just obvious cliches, and then you got to know them and they were way deeper than, sexy forest witch, Arthurian type character, suave elf thief, Sten, that sort of Martian manhunter trope, this unknowable, somewhat alien warrior character. I mean, Sten's practically a Klingon. Every character is sort of... Ogren was in that one? Yeah, Ogren was in that one. Varric is in 2. But I mean, Ogren's drunken ginger dwarf, of course. But, you get to know them. And Dragon Age 2, a lot of characters seem like, oh, this is a good guy. And then, whoa, they're kind of scary. The first 2 Dragon Age games had a really nice thing with stealth psycho women characters like Meryl and Liliana that I found really interesting. And then the minute they leaned into a relationship for every plumbing preference thing they did in Inquisition, they lost some of that. But sticking with Dragon Age 1 and 2, that everyone's wrong angle in Dragon Age 2 was handled much better in Disco Elysium. However, they had a lot more money. They've been doing it a lot longer. That's fair, right? And I'm saying this because Disco Elysium is one of these games where I avoided it based on critical acclaim. But people whose opinions I trust said, no, it's really fun, give it a try. And so I tried it, and I checked my aversion to praising games for saying something, because it shouldn't be about what the game says per se. It should be about what the game allows the player to do. And that's why I patently disagree that structurally the story of a drunk amnesiac cop who solves a case is any different than the story of a Grey Warden that saves the world from a zombie dragon, right? Structurally, it is just, here is the problem to solve. Because ultimately, most of Dragon Age Origins had nothing to do with the zombie dragon. I do think that subsequent games did, when you start with an existential threat like that justifies, allying with some fairly unscrupulous people to get the job done, it validates certain choices in a way that anything less just seems like, no, that's just too slimy. But I mean, the way the way that midpoint choice with Alistair and Logain pretty much guarantees you have to play it one more time to see what happens. And I was surprised at how much I found myself sympathizing with Logain, because I loved Alistair in Dragon Age Origins, and Logain was, but it grew on me. I got to do something about the Dragon Age games sometime. But I'm using this all as a point of comparison for Disco Elysium, just because the fact that a game made by a very small team even approaches that is, a testament to quality. Somebody who's working on an RPG right now, you get lost in the weeds with branching narratives so much. And I really understand why it's easy to let things meander and there seems to be no point. And I don't think there has to be in certain dialogue choices. If the character wants to expound on politics, it's kind of fun to have that option, even though I went through it kind of ambivalent, because I'm like, this guy's a cop. Every cop I know just hates everybody politically. So sometimes my character said things to tweak people. But what I liked about Disco Elysium is that the paths where I really got the sense that Harry had given up, and then he found a reason to keep going in moments. And I thought that was really poignant. But that's not what the critics lauded it for, right? It's the proof that video games are high art. And they compared it to Final Fantasy VII, insisting that, it's just a regular guy. But no, that was never the intent of Final Fantasy VII, right? Cloud was always supposed to be special. Or, the protagonist is always inherently special, no matter how everyman you make him structurally. And you need to lean into that, because people want the player to be special. It's his story. He matters, right? And the stuff with the booze and the drugs, I don't find that fun in games. So I didn't do it very much. I just had him go kind of slowly good, crazy. The game got into some sort of internet politics stuff. I don't know what happened with Chapo Trap House, but they removed all the voices from the final cut. And then they censored a homophobic slur, which I understand why they did it from a just get the fuck off my back perspective. But that's one of those things that either you choose to go there or you don't. If you're going to make the main character a bigot, show bigotry. Because it's not cute, it's not funny, it's grotesque, and it's lazy, and players should have to hear the word if they're gonna make that choice. That's my attitude in terms of a creative decision. Now, do I think that's fun? No, but I would never make that choice in game to go there, right? I prefer games where there's, metaphors for racism, kind of allegory, not real world racism, so we're a few steps removed, right? But I found the self-loathing of Harry tiresome, and critics love that. I found the political treatises tiresome. The critics love that. I found some of the writing too blunt instrument. The critics are like, it's high art. But what saves Disco Elysium is the fact that it functions as a game. It's not a guided tour through the developer's view of the world. You do have options. You can create, even though, there are certain things you just can't have because that's not in the cards for Harry. You can have an ending that's bittersweet and satisfying, right? It's a journey that can be satisfying because the choices are meaningful. And it's fun on multiple playthroughs to see how different it is. Now, the one thing I will kind of caution some people, because I went, whoa, and this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation on my own reactions, is the sidekick character, Kim, what's her name? Kim Katsuragi. When I first saw his portrait, I was like, whoa, this is kind of some Yellow Peril features going on here. Now, Kim ends up being quite a good character, but for people who are sensitive to that, I want to warn you, because I was like, Leanna, you didn't warn me about the Yellow Peril features. Like, yeah. The details on the portrait, I mean, the middle-aged white guy's ugly as fuck too, right? But there isn't the same historical pain point there. I don't, after a while, it was kind of cool to see a guy be Kim's sort of noble in his own way, and he's got Harry's back, even though he doesn't agree with a lot of the things Harry does, with good reason. So he ends up being okay, but it's just that I did have a bit of whoa moment when I first saw the portrait. Similarly with, it's a very man-focused game. And the female characters in it are all very stock, very tropey, very by the numbers. A lot of the male characters are, though, too, right? But again, personal point, because it's not centered on a woman, it's just so much more noticeable that it's just very much, a 40s femme fatale mixed with a 70s hot mess kind of female characters, plus, the hardcore, politically corrected kind of Thatcher type character, and the kindly old lady that's got more going on than you think. It's all very, very tropey, bordering on cliche. And that's where and this is why I wanted to talk about it, final point. Disco Elysium, I don't believe, makes the argument that video games are art. Disco Elysium makes the argument, to me, that you shouldn't judge video games on that metric. Video games contain art, but video games are games. And because they function as games, cliches don't sting as hard as they do in other mediums. I brought up Dragon Age Origins as an example because it's sort of, okay, here are these trope characters. Okay, got it. And then they peel back the layers of the onion. But you'll spend so much time miring the player down in dialogue if you don't use some narrative heuristics, right? And that's what tropes do. They're shorthands for particular things. Oh, she's a femme fatale. Got it. Okay. And for games, because it gets you into it faster. I mean, the Amnesiac shtick, Planescape Torment did it, The Witcher did it. There's quite a few games that do that because you can that way have a character with a backstory that the player doesn't know. And there are other games where BioShock does it as well. there are other games that, you pick, like Mass Effect was one, you pick a backstory for your character, but it never really matters and it doesn't really stick. And so making that, Fallout does it somewhat better. I mean, Cyberpunk has it so that some of your skills are tied to it, but I still had an issue with Cyberpunk having your best buds thing in the early hours of the game be a video montage. It's a cutscene montage. It's like, no, that's not how games work. Let me bond with the dude before you kill the fucker off if you want me to feel it. I felt more that the chick on the comms who, quoted literature died because I actually liked her. There were characters there that something to stick to instead of this shoehorned relationship that was only there for like 15 minutes before you off the guy, and I didn't give a fuck. And I never really embedded in the game because of that. Disco Elysium, on the other hand, you can take a huge amount of time waking up in the shithole room. He's living in the shithole building in a shithole town in a shithole society, and he's trying to get his necktie off the fan. And it takes forever, and it feels pathetic, and that's what the game wants, right? It wants you to feel like this is a low, and it doesn't tell you you should. It lets you do it and lets you feel it organically. And the fact that the most basic things are so difficult game-wise, unlike, Myst, where you can spend 5 days trying to figure out how to light a match and get a boiler running. But enough about my teenagers. The frustration, the sense of powerlessness, the difficulty is the point in Disco Elysium, and that sounds like a miserable experience. And in a way it kind of is, but it's sort of funny, and he's supposed to be pathetic, so you're like, okay, this is a feature, not a bug, and it works. But that only works because it's a game, and because you have the experience of doing. And there are choices that do change how the little subplots lay down. And that it has meaning because you're doing it, not because there's some inherent meaning to any of this nonsense. And that's what the game understands as a game, and how it gets around the reality of, oh my God, branching narratives are so hard to track. And I respected the hell out of the way it did it, even though the politics was not to my taste, the setting was not to my taste, the main character was not to my taste. I wouldn't have chosen any of it if I had my druthers. But the execution worked. And that's possibly the highest praise I could give a game. That none of it's my thing, and I ended up enjoying it because it was good as a game. And that's why I say games aren't art. Games are games. Games are, we don't have to justify games as art because games are games. Nobody makes basketball or football into art, and sports is considered a hard news beat now, right? Like, games are games. Games do that well. Interactive fiction is hard. And any games critic who feels the need to make a case that games are art, go review films, go review books. You shouldn't be reviewing games. You don't understand. And that's me talking about Disco Elysium. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. Remember, the workshop is this Saturday. Please join us. Tickets are $10. Saturday, April 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. It's on Zoom. You don't have to use your face. You don't have to be on voice. You can use a pseudonym and just participate in text. It's super, super chill. But hope to see you there. And if you like this sort of content, nominate a game for me to talk about. Thanks for watching.